Welcome everybody to this webinar, the very first webinar in our lunchtime lightbulb series. This webinar is titled 9 Top Tricks to Managing Poor Performance, more specifically dealing with attitude-based poor performance. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Sarah Sabel and I will be facilitating this discussion today. And I will be joined by Michael Meir. Welcome, Michael.
Hello, Sarah. Hello, everybody.
Now, before we get started, there are just a few housekeeping items to run through. This webinar will run for approximately 30 or 40 minutes, depending on our questions towards the end. I will open the second half of the webinar up to questions. So if at any point during Michael's presentation you do think of a question that you would like to ask, please jot that down in your questions panel in your dashboard there, and I will read them out and Michael will answer them for everybody to hear. And this will be a great opportunity for you to pick Michael's brain. And this webinar and the presentation slides will be made available once we're done here. I will email the link and the slides to you, which will be a terrific resource for you to keep. So, to give Michael an idea of who we have in the room exactly, I'm just going to run a short poll that hopefully you will see on your screen. We are dealing with new technology here, to be patient. And the question is, have you ever had to deal with a poor performer? So we're going to just wait for... There's 4 options there on your screen. Yes, no, I've never been in a position to. I'm not sure, let's see. So we're just waiting on a few more answers there. And all right, 100% have voted, Michael. As you can see, 80% of people have said yes, and 20% of people have said that they've never been in a position to, which is terrific. Over to you, Michael.
Thanks, Sarah. Those figures that you've just given pretty much represent reality, that 80% will have encountered difficult people at some stage during their managerial life. Now, it really doesn't matter what you do or how good you've been as a manager. Eventually, you will run into a person with an attitude. Of course, just what this means and how they demonstrate it is often quite subjective, but there are a few what I'll call attitude-based behavioural problems or challenging behaviours that we can use to help identify employees with an attitude. So let's have a look at some of these. Say the employee is constantly socialising. They may be rude or inconsiderate to others. If you ask them to handle something additional to their normal duties and responsibilities, often they can resist or become upset. There can be constant complaints about the company or the job. Performance can be sloppy. You can get the eye roll treatment when you, or sighs when you ask them or another person is speaking in the room. There can be chronic lateness. People can be annoyed with customers. There can be the know-it-alls. Or perhaps the behaviour is just defensive. Well, now, do any of those behaviours sound familiar to you? Probably they do. Have you got an employee at the moment who's with an attitude problem, who's making life hard for you? Well, look, if you have, don't worry. We all get them from time to time. And so here's a couple of strategies that you can use to help manage the situation. But first, the starting point is you really need to know what the problem or issue is. What's causing, what's behind the attitude problem? I think the first step is to ask yourself how the behaviour affects the business, the team, or yourself. For example, even if the employee is performing well, chronic complaining affects you, the co-workers, potentially customers. So you need to take time out to set it up to be able to manage the problem properly. First of all, list the behaviour. Make sure you write down just what the employee is doing that's so annoying. Might be gossiping all the time or not acknowledging customers when they arrive. If any of you have had the Myer experience where you've stood by the counter waiting to be served and pay for goods, you'll understand what I mean about by not being acknowledged. You need to identify when the employee engage in it. So if we go back to my example, it might be at the Myer counter, they're not acknowledging your presence, but otherwise it might be things like being on Monday mornings or Friday afternoons or before or just after breaks. The third thing you need to look at in there is how does it affect the business or the group or you? When you're managing your employees, you really have to provide specific information to them. Otherwise, they may not understand their behaviour and how it affects the business. Well, so far so good. Now, the next step gets a little bit harder, and it depends on just how comfortable you are with perceived or real confrontation. Some managers aren't willing to address the issue because, well, they fear the discussion will demotivate the employee or themselves, or perhaps they don't know how to approach the subject. Or they might be worried that the employee will just leave and they'll be left with unfinished business. If you're a manager who feels uncomfortable speaking to your employees about their behaviour, then you need to take time to find a solution to this issue, perhaps some assertiveness training. Now, if the behaviour that we're talking about is sudden, has occurred all of a sudden, or is new behaviour from the employee because they've never acted like this before, then you need to handle this situation differently. Usually, new behaviour indicates a change in the employee's life or a change in the work environment. This is quite different than an employee who has a habit of negative behaviour. But in both cases, remember, your goal is to understand and orchestrate a change in behaviour. To handle problem behaviour, I suggest, firstly, you create a list of the situations where you notice the inappropriate behaviour. This is so you'll better understand how to deal with the situation. If the employee has several problems, there's a whole list of things that need to be changed. Frankly, prioritise and focus on the most important one. If you put too many issues up at once, it might be well overwhelming to the employee, and therefore the likelihood is that nothing will change. You need to be specific about the actual behaviour. You shouldn't just say to the employee, look, they've got to change their attitude. That doesn't accomplish anything. Often they have no idea what you're talking about. You have to provide tangible examples in order to provide a vehicle for change. Present the issue as a problem to be solved, as you might say something like, look, this is a problem for me and I need your support to create a solution. Look, this is a non-threatening approach to the situation and one that actively seeks the employee's help in the solution. If the employee becomes defensive, then simply restate the issue. It's at this point you need to stay calm and confident and simply restate the issue and restate the issue. Cracked record. If the employee continues to be defensive, then clearly state that this behaviour has to change and that you're willing to work with the employee to help them find a solution. Find a way to allow the employee to take responsibility for the solution. If they don't, then it's likely that the issue won't be resolved. Brainstorm with them on how they could change the behaviour, but always keep the desired behaviour firmly fixed in your mind as the goal. If this is the first time you're discussing the issue with an employee, then I really recommend that you make notes. If the behaviour persists, you may need to develop a performance improvement plan and/or formalise the process into a performance review meeting, or worst of all, to provide a written warning. Making notes here is absolutely crucial. Always schedule a follow-up meeting within a short period, no more than a couple of weeks. What gets inspected gets done. Now, if the employee has altered or changed their behaviour, as this sort of approach encourages them to do, then I suggest you have one more meeting with them just to ensure that the behaviour is now consistent. Of course, if the behaviour hasn't changed, then you need to put in place a more formal process. In general, most employees want to perform well and behave in appropriate ways. The key point when managing employees is to set standards so employees know exactly what's expected of them and support them in meeting those standards. After all, their job is to meet or exceed those standards. Clear standards demonstrated by you that are actively walked is the key. The talk must be walked. Remember, disappointing performance isn't usually or only the employee's fault. The 85-15 rule tells us that provided people know clearly what's expected of them and that they're trained and resourced to do it, well then 85% of poor performance problems and low productivity that goes with it can usually result from something in the environment. When you find them and fix them, particularly when you jointly find them and fix them, you can get productivity back on track very quickly.
That's great. Thank you, Michael, for those wonderful words of wisdom. I will stop you there so that we can now open the floor up to some questions. We've had some great questions come through as you've been speaking. So I've got a question here about absenteeism. Can absenteeism be a sign of poor performance?
Oh, absolutely. Very often, Sarah, absenteeism isn't that the person is sick. They're sick of working for you. So it's developing an attitude that people, in fact, have started to divorce you. They're already starting to prepare to leave the business, although they haven't left. And so it is a very telling factor around performance.
Great. And Ruth has asked us, solutions offered to employee, but he still won't accept responsibility, don't want to do warnings, and again the employee has excuses for all behaviour which blame the office, so it is difficult to put forward warnings on the issue. How would we move forward?
Ruth, very important that you record absolutely everything, the employee side of it and the organisational side of it. It has to be documented very, very clearly and objectively. Eventually, this might need to formal discussions. It might need to some mediation in the behaviour. But crucially, if you're going to proceed at all with a performance management plan on this, it must be very, very clearly documented, and the employee provided with opportunities to rectify the behaviour. Now, in providing those opportunities, it's very important to clearly articulate what has to be changed, what is expected, to resource that change and to monitor its progress, and to make sure that the employee has a very sound idea of the consequences of not changing.
Terrific. Bernadette has asked you, how do you deal with a negative environment/person which moves through to other staff?
Oh, like cancer, negativity spreads and will spread very quickly. One of the things to do is to understand why the person is being negative. Is it a problem with a relationship within somebody else in the group? Are they bringing problems from home to work? Normally there is always an underlying cause. Most often it's in some form of dysfunctional relationship if it's a work-based problem. Find that out and then start to work from there as to how you solve it.
Great, and Ruth's also suggested here to assist in clearly identifying what is expected of our staff. We are doing a series in our toolbox meeting each week of how each position interacts with other positions and the effects their decisions have. It's a great idea.
Yeah, absolutely. Ruth, if you want teams to perform well, each person must know their own and all the other roles, responsibilities, authorities and accountabilities within the group so that they can see how everybody fits together.
Great, and Paul has also made a comment about good company culture would help, some stop-start conversations.
Company culture, Paul, is the key to everything. Functional cultures allow people to flourish, just as dysfunctional cultures will always result in damage. If one looked in there of stop-start conversations, the ability to have a stop-start conversation is a litmus test on the quality of the culture. Stop-start conversations go along the line of stop doing this, go stop-start, go on doing this because that's good. Stop doing that for valid reasons and start doing this in order to be able to perform performance properly. Now, those conversations need to be had as if through peers, not a power balance. And when you have that in a culture, it's a terrific test that you have a good culture.
Terrific. I've got a few more. Fiona has asked, how would you suggest an entry-level employee confronts a manager that they need to be more positive within the workplace? Tricky.
Oh, now that is a tricky one. What I'd probably do here, Fiona, is I'd approach the manager as if I, being the person, had a problem. I have a problem with this, and I think this is the underlying cause. Then this is the solution that I'm looking for. So you're not saying the other person's the problem. You're saying you've got a problem that needs a solution. Also in the back of that, focus on the outcome of productivity because that's what most managers are interested in. Why? What's the benefit and payoff of this change in behaviour?
I actually have a personal one, Michael, about your beer technique. Obviously not beer from the pub, for those listening, but your beer communication technique.
BEER is an acronym, obviously, for behaviour, experienced, expectation and response. So let's go through with that. The behaviour, being able to describe to the person specifically what the behaviour was in its specific instances. Then explaining to the person what was experienced as a result of that behaviour. Very often people aren't aware of the consequences of what they do. So a clear explanation of the experience. Then a clear expectation of what's expected, the standards that should be operating. Now we get to the R's. And the first R in there is response, giving the person the opportunity to respond. We then have to look at how the situation's going to be resolved. What activities have we to put in place in order to rectify the situation? The third one is a reward. Nothing changes without consequence. So you have to put in place a reward for the change. And the last R is the recognition of the person. Value the person, disagree with the behaviour. Now, I hope that's been explained, that one, Sarah.
Yeah, that's great. And whilst you were talking, Carol also made a note here that she really likes Michael's VABES. She was worried that she's missed it. We didn't cover VABES today, Carol, but it's great that you've brought that up. I will actually make a note to send out both the beer and the VABES to everybody who's joined us today. So I have just a couple more quickly before we wrap up. Katie has asked, how do you encourage a good work ethic within staff members?
All the time, and Katie, is, look, what gets recognised and rewarded gets repeated. So a good working culture must start at the stop. Top is what I meant. Where people can see what it looks like, and it has to be led by the senior management. The next part in there, and this is crucial, to recognise and reward, to say thank you, to recognise what's going on. One of the worst things you can ever do is abuse staff's goodwill. If staff have worked hard for you, then it has to be recognised. We all feel undervalued and underappreciated if we've worked very hard for somebody and they haven't acknowledged it. So creating a culture is recognising, reward, reinforce. That will lead to repeated behaviours.
Well, that's terrific, because I think that's also covered off Ruth's last question there about her staff have an expectation of thank yous and rewards for any behaviour, which is obviously what you've just covered off there, Michael. Well, that's terrific. We are out of time, so I will wrap it up here. But thank you very much for joining us today, Michael, on your lunch break.
Thank you very kindly, Sarah, and thank you to everybody, and keep on with the good work.
Yes, thanks to everybody who joined us also on their Friday lunch break today. I do hope you've enjoyed the very first of our 10 Lunchtime Lightbulb Series webinar, and that you do feel a little more comfortable in, or a little more confident in, dealing with poor performance. Like I said earlier before when we started, this webinar will be available to you, so I will send you the link and the PowerPoints. If you have any further tips or tricks that you would like to send us, we would love to hear from you. And also, if you would like a particular topic discussed in a webinar, we would also love to hear from you as well. We would love to generate a webinar around topics our students would like to hear. So here are our contact details. You can send us through an email, call us anytime on the phone. If you like us on Facebook, you can see there's often quite a bit of action going on there as well. But in the meantime, that's all from us today, and we hope you can join us again next week. Thanks very much.
Thank you.